All right, another Carolina podcast. We're back on a Monday. We didn't want you guys to have to wait until Thursday to get an in-depth recap of what was a huge recruiting weekend for South Carolina. 11 guys on campus, including 5 or 6, depending on where you're looking, 4-star guys. And we're going to do this quick hit style, efficient. Chris Clark and Wes Mitchell with me, as always, with all the details, all the inside scoops, except don't ask Wes about Luke Doty's measurements because he doesn't know, because he forgot to ask him this weekend, which is okay because it's not as important for quarterback as other positions. So we'll forgive you for that one, Wes.
Man, I didn't know that was like a burning question.
I didn't either.
For this weekend.
I didn't either. But Craig, shout out Craig if you're listening to this podcast as well, who chimed in on my local show, wanted to know about Luke Doty's measurements, and Wes didn't know. So we'll find out. We'll let Craig know at some point.
I mean, I know his measurements. I just didn't know what
the
updated ones for this week were.
I mean,
do you know, Chris? He's listed 6'1", 188.
Yeah, but is he 6'1" and a quarter?
You could have just made something up.
I know, right?
That would have been disingenuous.
Yeah,
we don't do that at
your
Gamecock
honesty.
Central.
Yeah, appreciate your honesty.
Carolina did get a commitment this weekend.
They did get a commitment. We'll lead with that, and then we'll go through the other 10 guys that were on campus, see what their status is, see what they liked, how their visit went. First, I want to remind you guys to rate, review, and subscribe. If you like what you hear, you want us to do more of it, that's a great way to support the show and ensure that we keep doing it. Also, I want to remind you that if you are not an insider on Gamecock Central, you can use the code GCPOD and get a month of insider action for free, which is pretty big time. And then once you get in there, you're going to love it, and then you're going to keep subscribing forever, which is what you should do anyways. All right, so guys, we will get started with the first commitment of the weekend, and that was Jazz Turnatine. As we found out, his name is pronounced. Wes and I spent my entire local show on 107.5, where you can catch me weekdays from 12 to 1, calling him Turnatine, because Wes, you assured me that that's how it was pronounced. And like literally as soon as we got off the air, Chris was like, you know it's Turnatine, right? And we're like, thanks. You should have just texted us.
Yeah.
That didn't happen. But he's a JUCO offensive lineman. He was on campus this weekend. Massive guy. 6'7", 339. Walk me through his recruitment and what this commitment means for Carolina.
Yeah, so he's a guy that Eric Wolfer got in on pretty early. He was a kid originally from Georgia, so his family's about 3 hours away from Columbia anyway. He would have drawn more looks out of high school, but he was a definite non-qualifier. And so he went out to Hutchinson Community College, which is one of the strongest programs out there in Kansas. They produced a ton of Division I talent over the years. And so you look at the way his recruitment's played out, Wolfer got in on him early, kept evaluating him, went out to Kansas, watched him play, saw what he was all about, and ended up offering him. That was his first offer, and then he picked up several others. Missouri was one, some other Division I offers that he had. And, probably a December graduate. He's got some work to do to get there, as junior college guys typically do. The summer is going to be important to get to that point. So a December graduate with 3 to play 2. It was always really just a case where this was really the only official visit that he scheduled. And so everybody sort of knew that if he got on campus, liked it, and then if everything checked out on South Carolina's end, if the staff felt comfortable with where he was at academically, that probably he'd end up in the class sooner than later. And so it wasn't a huge surprise from that standpoint.
Corey Robinson comparisons, because he's just huge. Corey Robinson, I think, was like 6'8", 330, so about an inch shorter, maybe a few more pounds on him. But when I think about JUCO offensive linemen, the first guy that comes to mind is Dennis Daly, who was just tremendous last year, with the exception of that Kentucky game where he was facing a top 10 pass rusher and gave up 3 sacks that game. Didn't have his best game, but overall was just an outstanding offensive lineman his entire time at Carolina. How do you think Turnatine projects for Carolina?
Yeah, I mean, he's a kid who's obviously he's a mammoth. I mean, you can't teach the size that he has. He moves pretty well. He's going to be a little bit raw. But
you can be too big at tackle.
Yeah.
That's happened before. It wasn't necessarily the case with Corey Robinson, who ended up being fine, but in this case, he's athletic enough to be able to move and contain some of those quicker edge rushers, you think?
Yeah, and I mean, the thing about Corey is once he, he bounced back and forth from offensive line to defensive line. He looked like one of those guys that wasn't going to pan out, and the staff did a really good job of figuring out what he needed to do to get into top-flight condition. Once they did that, we saw his career sort of take off. And so, Jazz is a guy that you just look at the physical tools, and he's really intriguing from that standpoint, even if he's not a finished product. Dennis Daly wasn't a finished product, not out of high school, not out of junior college. He developed very well. Not only Corey, but another sort of comparison that's been made to me, just in talking to some folks with Jazz, is Trenton Brown. And Trenton Brown was a former Georgia Military College product. Similar size, 6'8", just huge, human eclipse type guy. And he actually committed to Muschamp at Florida, played for Muschamp at Florida, was drafted, I think, by the 49ers, and Eric Wolford, as an assistant with the 49ers, coached Trenton Brown there. And so there was some sort of common ground there. I think that's something they were able to help sell on the recruiting trail as well. And, Trenton Brown, not to put these types of expectations, they just sort of share position and size, but Trenton Brown just signed the largest contract in NFL history for an offensive lineman in the offseason. So he's a guy that's developed tremendously. So I think anytime you look at that size, you get really excited about it.
Yeah, I think one thing worth mentioning as well with the JUCO guys and the new redshirt rule too is that he is a 3-to-play-2 guy. So if he does come in and he's a bit raw and what have you, there's also a chance for some of these guys. I think JUCO kids always, not always, but almost always have a pretty big jump from junior to senior year. We saw it with Dennis Daly. He I think made a big step up, and Jabari Ellis came in this last year on the defensive line and took a red shirt, and we thought he was going to play, but didn't, and then had a big spring. So I think the adjustment from JUCO ball to SEC ball isn't always immediate, but if you give a guy a chance to maybe come in, get in a few games, potentially you could keep him, as a junior and then have 2 really good full years, depending on what the competition looks like at tackle as you start to look ahead to 2020. Just something to keep in the back of your mind. That's always a possibility with these guys. But like Chris said, big kid, can move. They offered him very early, so obviously, Wolford liked him a lot. And I just think, like I said on your local show, I think it was just a no-brainer on all sides. It was just a good fit. It's a great fit for everybody, I think.
He has announced his commitment. Last week when we did this, I put the over-under 1.5 for commits that Carolina would get from this group of 11 that visited this past weekend. And they have until Friday for the sake of our over-under and for no other significant purpose. Wes, you took the over. Chris, you took the under, which means he's the one. You got to get one more of these next 10 guys that we're going to talk about. And we'll just go ahead and get started. And Wes, I'll let you start with this one. Tank Bigsby, who we talked also a lot about last week, and just sort of what the situation may have been, how things may have changed in terms of Bigsby's recruitment after Marshawn Lloyd announced his commitment to South Carolina. What did you know about Tank's visit this weekend?
Yeah, I think it went really well. Tank, we haven't talked to Tank after. He hasn't done any interviews and stuff like that, but I heard it went great. He's a guy that's really, I think, from what I've been told, acted like he's already a part of the class while he's on campus. He's got a great connection with the other kids, Luke Doty, Daquan Stewart, Mike Wyman. These guys all like each other. They're all friends. And I think the question sort of remains, it was the same question coming into this weekend, is, when will Tank Bigsby decide to announce a commitment? I think if it's any time fairly soon, then I think you got to feel really good about South Carolina's chances. If it starts to drag out, if Georgia gets more involved, then you start to maybe worry a little bit more if you're looking at it from a South Carolina perspective. But, so far so good. I think the prevailing thought from this weekend is that, everything just went smoothly, I think, with all the uncommitted guys. So I think South Carolina's still in the lead, even if Tank isn't, talking about it right now. So
and they busted out the tank for him.
Yeah, which was, I think, pretty awesome.
Yeah. For those of you that didn't see on Twitter, they literally got a tank from the National Guard Armory Museum building that's right there on Bluff and National Guard. Is it Boulevard Street? No,
National Guard Road, I think.
Is it Road? Okay.
I think, but don't.
But anyways, y'all that live in Columbia know what we're talking about. They brought a tank, and he stood on top of it, and it was really cool.
I think, and Chris, do you have a feel at this point for when? I feel like that's the unknown right now. Is that
with Tank as far as the timeline?
Yeah, when will Tank commit?
I think it would be a shock if he took it. What I've always been told is that it would be no later than the end of July. But, even when you hear that with guys, sometimes it can change. I think it'll be this summer sometime. There was sort of a thought that maybe it would be, May. I know we heard some talk about that, but it hasn't happened so far. Of course, you got to remember these other schools aren't just trying to give up. Nobody lands guys like Tank Bigsby just with no issues.
Right.
I mean, everybody tries to complicate it and muddy the waters. So that's probably what's going on. I mean, I'd rather be South Carolina than any other school for sure. But like Wes said, I mean, it is a situation where you'd like to get him in the boat sooner or later just to make sure some of those other things can't happen.
Right. So, yeah. So given how well his recruitment has gone to this point, should it concern South Carolina the longer this drags on?
Yeah, I mean, it can get concerning if that happens. I mean, I don't know. You know, I guess it would be how long is it? Are we talking about, is it drag out just to like August, or are we talking about like December? You know, if it drags out past the summer, I think that would be a little bit more concerning for the Gamecocks.
All right, next guy up, a 4-star defensive end, 6'4", 240, out of Greensboro, North Carolina, Miles Murphy.
Yeah, Miles is a player that, you know, ever since the staff offered, he's been a top priority for them. He's got an interesting body type to where, you know, he could probably play inside or outside, maybe a little bit like Joseph Anderson as far as the body type. I mean, different types of players, but Anderson's a guy who, you know, you looked at him coming out of high school, and his weight sort of fluctuated during high school, but he always had the look of somebody who could be an end or a tackle. He's playing end for South Carolina and had a really good spring for them. And so I think maybe body type-wise similar. Wouldn't be surprised if Miles, you know, played inside for South Carolina, because it looks like sort of that's where his progression is gravitating towards. But he's an athletic guy who they really like and have been in really good position for. I think this weekend only enhanced that.
Next guy up, another offensive lineman, a guy that hasn't been talked about that much, but another really, really big guy, offensive tackle Joshua Braun, 6'6", 335, out of Live Oak, Florida.
You know, there's some family connections there. Will Muschamp's brother, Mike Muschamp, who is a high school coach in the Atlanta area, has some familiarity with Mike Braun, who is Josh's father. It's a whole family of offensive linemen. Mike, you know, was a guy in college, and then, you know, 3 brothers with Trey and Parker, and now Josh, who are going to all have played major college football. Parker just transferred from Georgia Tech to Texas for his final season of eligibility coming up this year. And, you know, Josh is a 4-star guy who, you know, really bright student and really high upside as an offensive lineman too. So Muschamp and Wolford have been on him for quite a while. Florida, South Carolina, Georgia, those are the main ones to watch. And really, after this trip to South Carolina this past weekend, the only other visit that he has scheduled on the books is Georgia, June 14th weekend. And so I've sort of heard some conflicting things as far as, I know South Carolina's in it very heavily, particularly after this weekend, and I've sort of heard some conflicting things to the primary challenger, as whether it's Georgia, whether it's Florida. There's some different opinions on that. I think if Parker had transferred to Florida, that would have helped the Gators a little bit more, depending on the experience that he ended up having there. But well, I think we got to see how this trip to Georgia goes. I know Josh was very impressed with the academics, specifically the business school. We had a lot of comments about that he was very excited about, and loves Wolford too. So I think South Carolina's heavily, heavily in it for him.
Yeah, how could you not? Wes and I spent a little bit of time on my local show earlier just talking about, not that Wolford's underrated, because I think people, especially around here and people that really follow the Gamecocks and follow recruiting, understand how good Wolford is. But even still, I feel like he's unsung. Just obviously his recruiting prowess, and then maybe even more than that, just his player development is second to none. Like, he's, I don't know. I mean, this is maybe like a summertime podcast, and I don't even know how exactly we would do this. But even if we just looked at like the last 20 years, he's got to be one of the best 3, 5, maybe probably 3, 4 assistant coaches that Carolina's ever had. I mean, and maybe I'm overreacting, but I think that dude is just an unbelievable coach. Like, everything he touches turns to gold.
Yeah, I mean, his track record's pretty good.
I mean, who else do you put in there for just like all-time great assistants that Carolina's had?
Oh boy, we could do a podcast on that.
Yeah, we will.
We should.
I guess this is a little
Brad
teaser
Lawing's
for that.
up there.
Yeah, Brad Lawing, awesome. G.A. Mangus, dude knew how to coach quarterbacks, and he knew how to get the most out of Stephen Garcia that I don't know if there was anybody else in the country that could have maximized his talent the way that Mangus did.
You know, I think with Wolf, the thing that stands out about him is that there's a very particular plan as far as what he's looking for in each class. And, you know, I think the O-line, too, is a spot where his job is to go get offensive linemen. Like, he's not really – doesn't have to be so much concerned with, other territories and stuff like that. I think, when he came in, that's a position where you have to recruit 4 or 5 guys every class. kudos to Muschamp for basically turning him loose and saying, hey, your job is to have this position fixed and to stay fixed, basically. So go sign a bunch of guys that fit what you're talking about. And I think the thing we've seen is an upgrade in athleticism. I think South Carolina's offensive line had gotten to the point where, especially at the tackle positions, that was a big concern. Matching up with these defensive ends at the SEC level is you have to have a certain level of athleticism to do that. And South Carolina, I think, was lacking there. So we've seen Wolford have a clear plan, the personality, the work ethic to go get it done. And now I think it's actually, you've arrived at a position or at a school. Not that South Carolina is dominant on the offensive line yet, because that's not what I'm saying. But
that was a really good group last year, though.
But when you get to a point where if you lose a Javion Cohen, which they did, he committed to Auburn over the weekend, or even if you lose an Isaiah Walker eventually, that's going to be a battle to the end, I think. You feel like you're going to be fine at that spot, because I think he's got the ability now to get them in on enough high-quality guys that even if you miss, you're going to miss on part of them, but if you're in on enough of them, you're going to sign a good class every year. So it's kind of it's a numbers game too, but it's about getting in on enough, high enough quantity of quality, whereas in the past, maybe South Carolina is having to put all of its eggs into a couple of baskets, and if you miss on those guys, then you're talking about a big drop-off.
Or if one of them doesn't pan out, and then, of course, offensive line, there are always injuries, so it's about having that quality depth, and that's sort of, I think, a common refrain around here as Will Muschamp starts to build these classes. It has more to do with, who is the next guy up and what's the drop-off than even just like what is the top-end talent.
And I think, can I make one more point?
Yeah.
Do we have a moment? So I think one thing that stands out is I think you got to give Muschamp credit for giving, like Wes said, turning Wolford loose and saying, go just take care of the offensive line, take care of your position. Not only that, but giving him numbers to work with. Like, Muschamp's a defensive coach. That's his background, and so in terms of just evaluating and things, that he can evaluate talent at every position, but, defense, that's his bag. Like, that's the thing he can do. But he gives numbers every year, 3 to, or it's going to be 4 to 5 every year offensive lineman. Really, that's what you need to take. You don't need to have a class where you take one offensive lineman or two. You can get yourself in a lot of trouble doing that. And so we've seen them take numbers every year, and Wolford always has a plan. He always has a board, and they've hit a lot of their top priorities there. Not always, but they've done pretty well. And Wolford's a guy that it's hard, for whatever reason, it's harder to find offensive line coaches who like to recruit, who are good at evaluating and like to recruit. You can find recruiters at running backs coach or tight ends coach or whatever. I don't know why it is, but it's hard to find O-line coaches who can evaluate, coach, and also recruit. And Wolford,
I would imagine
is
that's
a
a
guy
very
who always likes to
meticulous
do it.
process for offensive line. Like when you look at running backs, it's like that dude just broke that guy's ankles and then ran 60 yards in like 3 seconds. But
it's
for offensive
difficult.
line, it's got to be way more tedious to scout those
Defensive
guys.
back and offensive line are the two toughest, just on film
Yeah.
to evaluate. It's hard to evaluate. You can evaluate a running back on film, but not offensive linemen as much. It's hard.
Yeah, and Wes mentioned that on my local show as well, and that took me by surprise because I didn't know that, but seems like, at least in y'all's opinion, the defensive back class is usually like the latest to develop for, kinds of similar reasons. I want to go back to one thing you said. You were talking about Will Muschamp obviously having defensive expertise. You said that's his bag?
Yeah.
That's a great expression, and I think we need to bring that back. That feels kind of 90s.
Is it? Okay.
I think so.
Is that a nice thing?
I was still pretty young in the 90s.
Or maybe
too,
like,
so
I don't know, early aughts. I'm not sure. I feel like that's an expression that like I was aware of.
Sometimes I
but
just
never
make
used.
stuff up.
That's his bag. That's cool. It might even be like older, and like in the early aughts, it was retro.
What was the one you said yesterday that was the made up? Like you're like, I don't even know what that means, but you said it.
You don't want to sell the farm?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or you don't want to give away the farm.
Yeah, but it's bet the farm.
You don't want to give away the farm.
Well, he said give away the farm.
I was
Kind of
like-
mixed metaphors.
I've heard that one too, though. Give
Like
away
you
the
can
farm.
lead a horse to water, but you can only skin it once. I
Is
love mixed
give away the
metaphors.
farm one or not? Because as soon as I said it,
no,
I was
bet
like,
the farm. Yes.
It's bet the farm.
Well, I think it's both. You can do
Yeah.
either or.
Why would you give away your farm?
exactly. you don't want to give away.
Well,
the farm.
it's just like if you gave away a product
well, it's also
completely.
I think
Although
maybe
we do
there's-
that with this podcast.
Hey.
Yeah, if you want to sponsor it though,
And
give
And
us
the
a call.
newsletter.
Yeah.
I think maybe I got that also because I've been thinking about Major League Baseball, and you don't want to give away the farm is like you don't want to give away your farm system.
Okay.
When you're, you don't want to give away the whole farm if you're trying to get some.
Yeah.
Like,
You're not
trade
thinking
for
about
somebody.
like agriculture and livestock.
I don't know. I mean, originally it was probably.
Well, what I told Wes was a farm has a lot of things on it.
Yeah,
You got
it's-
land,
So
you
you
got
don't wanna give
animals,
away.
you got buildings.
I mean, land. You can
home.
just stop at land. You can't give away land.
Right.
Exactly. So don't give away.
So it makes
you don't
a lot
wanna
of
give away
sense.
the farm.
Chickens and.
All right.
All right, we've been talking about offensive linemen, and you mentioned him a second ago, so I'll start with you, Wes, as we move on to our next guy, Isaiah Walker, 6'4", 265, offensive tackle, according to Rivals.
Way more than 265 now.
Yeah, I was going
Hey,
to
we
say.
do have the updated.
Yes.
He was asking
Yeah,
about
I
that.
did my job,
It was
Wes.
Craig.
So yeah, give me the
280.
No.
updated measurements
So
on
Wes
the
doesn't read my stuff either.
on
Man,
the
I'm
6'4"
so
offensive
disappointed.
tackle out of Miami, Florida.
How much does he weigh now, Chris?
He's 304.
304.
Yes, every bit of it.
Miles Murphy is 280. Okay, that's where I got that from. I didn't read.
Yeah,
his
he's
story
listed
though.
as 240.
Miles Murphy being
right here in
280 is
this little
impressive,
write-up y'all
too.
did.
Yeah. So cool. By the way, I'm gonna digress like crazy for a second.
Good.
So Will Muschamp house, like visit
Mhm.
Lake House.
Yeah.
Lake Murray.
Mhm.
That's to me, on average, the most fun part of the official visit. When you talk to kids and you say, "Hey, what did you like the most?" They always like that trip because you're on the water, you're out there, you're having fun. And have y'all seen? I don't know what you call it. Have y'all seen the jetpack things?
Yeah.
That
Mhm.
we've seen the current players get on and shoot up in the air. So I asked Miles Murphy if he got on the thing, and I know. So Luke Doty got on the thing, and it shot him like 20 feet in the air.
Seems like
But-
such a liability.
You would think. But I asked Miles Murphy if he got on there, and he said, sure enough, that they tested it out and that it did get him off the ground. He's like, now not as high as Luke Doty. He's like, because I'm 280 pounds, which is how I know he's 280 pounds. But he said he did get up in the air on this thing.
Okay.
So I thought
Not
that was the
above the weight
most
limit.
that was the most interesting thing I took away
Good to know.
from this official
So
visit weekend.
he and Isaiah Walker have both put on 40 pounds since their last weigh-in.
Yes.
It's good to know.
When Isaiah Walker committed to South Carolina, May of 2018, so a little over a year ago, he was 245. Wow. Another fun fact
Wow.
for you. So about 60 pounds.
And good weight, right?
I think so. Doesn't look sloppy.
He posts a lot of videos online of him working out too.
Yeah, that's a lot of weight to put out in the year. I'm not saying. I mean, it's impressive dedication to your diet and your workout and all that stuff.
Yeah. And
what-
Miles looks great physically too. So
Yeah.
Anyway, we were
So,
talking about Isaiah Walker.
Yeah, so Walker, a guy that's already committed to South Carolina. But as we were talking about this offensive line class, you mentioned that despite him already being committed, it's probably going to come down to the wire. What'd you hear from his camp after this weekend?
Yeah, well, as I was not reading Chris's story on him, I learned that, I think it was a great weekend for him. I think that the interesting thing here, though, is that he is still going to look to take some other official visits, and he's still talking to other schools. And, I believe the way he says he's still enjoying the recruiting process. So, I think it's one of those things where you'd rather him be committed than not. So, you're happy about that, but I don't think you never assume that he's going to be in this class until he's signed into this class. And I think if everything plays out on the field just fine, I still think South Carolina's probably where he wants to be, but I don't know that you can consider anything locked in at this point. I mean, would you agree? Is that the best way to say that? I mean,
Yeah. I mean, if a kid hasn't shut down the process and is pretty open about the fact that he's not shutting it down and is going to keep taking visits, keep entertaining coaches, always something to watch. I mean, always. But I would rather be where South Carolina is than anybody. It's not a deal where you feel like they're just sort of hanging on by a thread with him. I don't think it's like that.
He's a clear leader, but somebody else could possibly emerge. And you and I talked about this, or all three of us talked about this on Friday. I think it was you, Wes, that said you would probably say about 80% of people that had a verbal commit to South Carolina over the last, 10, 20 years, whatever, have ended up going, but this is one of those that would probably fall into the 20%. Not necessarily that it's not going to happen, but that you just take that commitment with a little more grain of salt than the other guys.
Yeah, and the kid at least has been upfront about the fact that he's taking other visits.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like he's, saying that he's not and then taking trips. He's been open about it. He's been honest about it, and we'll see. But I think in general, most guys end up sticking, but because it becomes a big news story when a guy decommits, then that's sort of on the forefront of people's minds. So when they think of recruiting and they, talk about, oh, a verbal commitment means nothing, most of the time it does mean something, but in some cases it doesn't. And I do think with the recruiting process starting earlier and earlier, maybe guys aren't quite as ready to commit, even though now they are. So you may see a little bit uptick in the number of decommitments just because younger guys are, committing now.
Now, they broke out the tank for Tank Bigsby. Did they have like a snow walker for Isaiah Walker, like an AT-AT?
I don't.
What is a snow walker? Like a snowmobile?
No, an AT-AT.
This is a Star Wars
This is a Star Wars thing. I know you.
Oh, I did know that. I didn't know the.
All right,
I didn't know the
that's the thing they have
initials.
on Hoth.
What's the AT?
AT-AT. That's the big, like.
Why is it called an AT-AT?
It's like I don't know, like
Actually,
all-terrain attack tank, or it's something
Okay.
like that. I have no idea what it actually stands for, but it's something like that.
It's way too hot in Columbia for anything that involves the word
It doesn't
snow.
have to be
is
snow
my
though. I think they
answer.
brought
It's
them
a snow
to,
walker,
but it's all
It would
terrain.
melt.
It's all terrain. We just know it from Hoth because the only time we see them use them is actually not the only time. So they use them on Hoth, and then when Luke
I can feel our
goes-
ratings going down.
when
right now.
Yeah,
Luke we
everybody
don't have
logged
ratings. When Luke goes to meet Palpatine and Vader. By the way, everyone that's listening to this knows what I'm talking about. You two losers
No.
are just sort of stuck in between where you
No.
didn't have Star Wars movies growing up, which is why you're so sad now all the time. But when Luke and Vader, or when Vader is taking Luke to go meet Palpatine on
Yeah,
Endor.
Speak English.
No, when
You're
they're
not
on
even speaking
Endor,
English. I'm asleep.
going to see Palpatine,
I
they're
fell asleep.
leaving the AT-AT. They're like taking the elevator out of the AT-AT. So it's all terrain. It's not just snow. But they didn't have one of those for Isaiah Walker?
No.
Okay, all right. Maybe next time.
All right, comment on the Insiders Forum if you knew what he was talking
They
about.
know, these people,
or you didn't
these lovely people know exactly what I'm talking about.
I'm going to say
Chris.
it's at least 50% or below.
Know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
You realize Star Wars is like a big deal, right?
I do, but not
Okay.
to that extent that
Everyone
they know
knows
all
what an
those names and
AT-AT
places
is.
and all that. But no, I'm
Everyone-
talking about all the... Anyway,
People know
moving
about the
on.
forest moon of Endor.
Moving
You're
on.
you're really underestimating Star Wars fans. You're just jealous that you're not a part of it. That's fine.
Okay,
It's fine.
moving on.
Chris, I'll let you start with this one. Another verbal commit for South Carolina. Michael Wyman, 6'4", 197, wide receiver out of Greensboro, North Carolina. Any updates from Wyman this weekend?
Nothing significant, right? I mean, Wes probably doesn't know his weight or in height. I think he's still 6'4", probably. But everything's good. I mean, I think he's solid.
Has he
Nothing.
is he part of what I'm myself just calling like the Doty crew of the guys that have taken it upon themselves to be the ambassadors for this class?
Not as much as Luke. I mean, Luke is sort of a different breed with that type of stuff. You know, sort of like Ryan Helinski was in the last class. He's sort of taking the charge. But, yeah, I mean, you would see Luke and Michael Wyman and Daquan Stewart, hanging out a lot together over the weekend.
But is still solidly committed
solid.
without necessarily,
My bad.
taking that leadership role. Okay.
No,
All
I
right.
think, when Mike first committed, he was talking about taking some other official visits and stuff like that. Since then, he's really just locked it down. South Carolina's where he wants to be. Let's see. And he's actually the only, as we're recording this, he's the only guy that's committed that we have not spoken with yet from the weekend. But he plus Luke Doty plus Daquan Stewart will all be at South Carolina again on Friday for camp, which I thought was kind of cool. They planned it out to where they were going to camp on the same day so that Luke and Daquan and Mike can actually throw with each other.
So camp starts Thursday. They're going to the Friday.
Yes, they're going to Friday so that they can all be there at the same time, which I thought was, I think speaks a little bit to just their bond and just the fact that they're thinking this thing through. It would have been pretty easy to just go to camp on a random day, but they planned it to where they're all going to be there at the same time. And obviously, quarterback, receiver, anytime you can go ahead and start throwing with each other, it's not a bad thing.
Absolutely. All right. Well, so you already mentioned both of those guys. They're both committed to Carolina. They're the next two on the list, so we'll just package them together since we're running a little bit long here. Luke Doty, 6'1", 188, we think. Wes doesn't know for sure, out of Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And Daquan Stewart, he's a three-star wide receiver, 6'2", 195, out of Huntersville, North Carolina. They're going to be here Friday. What'd you hear from this weekend?
Yeah, another great visit. Luke, used a lot of his time just recruiting others, trying to make other people feel comfortable. He was hosted by Ryan Helinski, which I thought was pretty cool. Those guys I think have similar personalities in some ways. I always thought they would hit it off, and they met during a game last year when they were both on campus. So, they've already sort of started to establish a relationship. So, great visit. Luke's been on campus so many times now. I think he probably holds my personal record for most times I've interviewed a kid, I think, because I've interviewed him, I can't tell you how many times, but always glowing things to say about the staff and, everybody here, the way he's treated. One of his favorite parts was actually he had a sit-down with Dan Warner in the quarterback's room where it was just like a true 30, 45 minutes just like X's and O's talk and going over the scheme and literally like a coaching session of here's how we teach this.
So it's the John Gruden quarterback room, but the college version?
Basically, yeah. So, Luke really liked that. And then Daquan, a.k.a. Bobo Stewart, he always has a great time too. Love that kid. Great personality. Just fun interview, fun dude. And, he said they actually talked about how they want to use him, and that was one of the highlights for him. Hosted by Ortre Smith. Ortre's message to him was, hey, they play freshmen, so just come in and be ready. And, they want to use him on the outside receiver spot, but he could potentially play some slot as well. And they compared him to Debo a bit, so that was something that I think stuck out. I think something that caught his attention where he kind of that was an honor for him to be mentioned, along the same lines. And he's actually a 49ers fan, so the fact that Debo, a kid he has loved watching play college football, got drafted to his team, and now he's being compared to him, that was like a cool moment for him.
And Wolford coached the 49ers, so tenuous connection there. So Daquan's a 3-star guy. He looks like he's right on the cusp. His rivals aggregate is 5.7. Doty's is 5.8, and that puts him in 4-star range, so he is pretty close. You think he's a guy that, next season, if he has another good statistical season, he could jump up to the 4-star.
I think potentially, man. Yeah, I'm looking forward to watching him. We saw him at the Rivals camp at Nation Ford. Yeah. Played well there. We'll see. We'll be out there on Friday to watch him. I think he's not a guy that's going to move down. I don't think. I think he's at the very least a high 3-star guy. If he had a huge year, could he be a 4-star? Yeah, because most people that see him play are pretty impressed with the kid and say he's a bit underrated. So I think it's either way, it's a nice pickup. I'm very curious to see. Wyman's a 4-star guy. Stewart's a 3-star guy. I'm ready to see them side by side because you can make the argument that Stewart is probably every bit the player that Mike Wyman is. So I'm curious to see both of them at the same.
So y'all
place.
are going to get to see Doty throw balls to both of those guys on Friday?
Yes.
That's going to be cool.
And then we'll type about it.
A glimpse of the future. And then talk about it on this podcast.
Exactly.
Another high 3-star guy, and Chris, I'll let you start here. Dominic Hill, 6'1", 170. Listed as an athlete. South Carolina recruiting him as a defensive back.
Yeah, he's a big player who's really, his recruiting process, just exploded over the past several months. He was a guy that was a receiver in high school, switched over to defensive back, and then we saw his offer list sort of explode. He's a guy who can run. He's got great size. He's 6'1". He's put on a lot of weight. I think he's listed at 170. And then you look at back some of his older camp pictures. He's really filled out a good bit, put on some more good weight. It just has a really high upside. He's one of those defensive backs that you see the potential there and you see his length. He's really sort of how you draw him up in terms of what you look for and can contribute on special teams as well.
And he's from Florida, which for some reason always seems to help defensive backs.
Yeah, automatically.
Yeah.
Yes. So, he's a player out of Orlando they really like. I think this is his 3rd visit this year to South Carolina of the overnight variety, this one being his official visit. One more visit to Missouri later this month on the 14th, assuming that does still take place. That's his plan right now. May take another 1 or 2 in there, but I don't think he'll leave June without being committed somewhere, I don't think, and the Gamecocks are in good position there.
2 more guys that were in town this weekend, both of whom are verbally committed to South Carolina. We'll start with Muhammad Kaba, who's another high 3-star guy, could end up as a 4-star. We talked about him about a month ago when he committed, 6'3", 205 from Clinton, North Carolina. Wes, what did you hear from Kaba's camp?
Yeah, first of all, very just business-like kid. I don't think he had a great time this weekend, but I don't think he's the guy that gets caught up in all the hoopla of the official visit, which I think is a good fit for this defense. They talk about being a blue-collar defense. And, this kid, he fits. And I heard he had a great spring as far as just his progress high school-wise, that Carolina is even more high on him now than they maybe were before. So, this kid, he had a great weekend. He was hosted by Jamar Brown, who actually I think has a similar personality to him. Jamar just got on campus himself recently. But, it's a guy that's a scheme fit, could play the wheel, could play the mic. Really he's looking forward to being here at South Carolina soon. So I think that, this is a guy that I still believe, even though he's, a 3-star guy on Rivals. Didn't we officially make him a Gamecock Central 4-star on the local show?
I think we did.
So
I think we did.
To me, he's a 4-star guy. I don't know if you agree, Chris.
Yeah, I do.
Well, he's 4-star upside because he's a rangy guy, which is important for linebacker nowadays. You got to cover in space and be able to attack downhill, and he seems to do all of those things as well as anybody in the class.
Yeah, I mean, just the things that we hear about him, and then you just turn on the film. He's definitely a GCC 4-star or a GC.
Yeah, there you go.
Whichever one,
All right, last guy up, and you both already mentioned him when we were just doing an overview of the offensive line class a couple minutes ago. Tyshawn Wanamaker, again, a verbal commit to South Carolina, 6'4", 330 from St. Matthews, right up the road. What did you hear from Wanamaker?
Yeah, I think he had a good visit. He's not a kid that says much at all, but he's solidly in the class, has a good relationship with Wolford, and he gets to campus a decent amount and sort of doesn't maybe recruit other guys as much as like a Luke Doty, but he is sort of in that group where those guys have like gotten to know each other and hang out when he's on campus. And I think he's a solid commitment to South Carolina, and probably one of the guys in this class that isn't going to be talked about as much, but has, I think he has just as good a chance of being a contributor down the road as anybody. You see this every year, state of South Carolina. Maybe small town guy doesn't really get as many looks sometimes as maybe he would if he was at a bigger school, but is a really good prospect in his own right, and future guard, I think, for Carolina. Has slimmed down a little bit in recent weeks, can move really, really well for his size, and just had, with committed guys, it's a little bit different on official visits. It's just more about being around your future teammates and learning more about sometimes even the logistics of what it's going to be like when you get there. I talked to him. I asked him what his favorite part was, and he said everything. I asked him what he ate on the trip. He said everything. So
that's good. He's going to play guard. He needs to be beefy.
I think it went well.
This could be a big domino class, guys.
I agree.
This could be a big domino class. I mean, this
domino class. What you mean?
I mean, when we're talking, the domino effect. You ever played dominoes before? Not played.
Well,
dominoes.
I know what you mean, but you mean like the 21 class is going to be stronger than this one?
Well, this feels like, I don't want to say like a jumping off point, because obviously everything Muschamp's done in his first couple of years here is leading up to this point, but this feels like the big class that if Will Muschamp does work out here at South Carolina and gets them back into 9, 10, 11 win seasons every year, I think this is the class that people are going to look back. This is going to be sort of the Stephon Gilmore or the Marcus Lattimore class where it's like, oh yeah, like most of these guys panned out. It's NFL bodies. It's, depth of talent. It's guys all across the board and really well-rounded. I mean, we're talking about a 4-star quarterback and, a 5-star running back and a 4-star defensive end and 4-star wide receiver. Like, Carolina's really going after their needs and getting a lot of guys and snatching them out of some people's back pockets, out of some people's backyards. Like, this feels like I said earlier, like the Stephon Gilmore or Marcus Lattimore kind of class that Spurrier had.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it is, like you said, it's deep. It's got a chance to be really good at several different spots. I mean, to me, you look at 2019, signed a really good quarterback.
Mm-hmm. Really good defensive end.
Really good defensive line. But the key here is, if the running back situation. I mean, I think that's what could potentially separate it.
Right, absolutely. So we'll keep you updated, of course, on all these guys. And we have camp starting this Thursday, so we'll be back a little bit later in this week to preview that. And like I mentioned earlier, if you guys like this and you want to hear more of it, remember to rate, review, subscribe. Be sure to share it with your friends. And subscribe to Gamecock Central if you're not already subscribed. And you can use the exclusive podcast code GCPOD, GCPOD, to get a month free of Gamecock Central insider information, which is great around this time of year when we have camps and all these big recruiting weekends and things like that. I also want to remind you to sign up for the newsletter, which is completely free and just lots of good info. It's just great. Like everything that you could possibly need to know for that day or for that week is all in the Gamecock Central newsletter. So we'll be back a little bit later this week with a camp preview. And as always, thanks for listening.